Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Bev Browning to talk about new mistakes or mistakes that new nonprofits make. Bev, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's an honor to be here.
Well, the honor is mine. Before we get started, because there's a lot I'm sure we can talk about and we will talk about, I was curious if you could share your superhero origin story.
Well, I am originally from Flint, Michigan, born and raised there, and actually lived in Michigan in the Flint area for 45 years, predominantly Flint, Grand Blanc Township, and then Burton. And then our daughter graduated from high school, and we didn't want her to go where she was planning to go. So I orchestrated a sudden move to Phoenix, Arizona, metro area. And that meant because she was a minor, she had to come with us and she had to go to the university here as a stipulation for us helping with her expenses. So we ended up here and we've been here ever since, although I did have a runaway few years from 2001 to 2004 when I had to write the first grant writing for Dummies edition, which was 2001. I realized that there was just too much noise, too much congestion where we lived at, and I couldn't think. And it was going to be my first major publication with a big name publishing house. So we moved in less than 30 days to Hot Springs, Arkansas, away from the city, in a quiet little cul-de-sac where I could write my book. So we stayed there 3 years and then we came back to Arizona. So my humble beginnings, oldest child, have a younger brother, 13 years younger, raised by my grandparents till the age of 13, and then had to go home to live with my parents because my brother was born and he went to be raised by my grandparents. So very different, dysfunctional, and I observed a lot of things going on and decided the kind of life that I wanted. And in my mind and my heart and my studies academically, I set goals, silent goals to myself, and decided to check one off at a time and leave home at 18, get married. I've been married 58 years this year in December.
Wow.
And go to college. And I was in college for 20 years, part-time.
My parents just celebrated their 54th wedding anniversary. So,
Wow, congratulations.
yeah, well, congratulations to them for sure. Yes, they're an inspiration, and you are inspiration as well. Yeah, that's a whole different topic of marriage these days versus marriage in the previous generation. But awesome, that's really great news. Tell me more also about your nonprofit experience. So, how you started working with nonprofits.
Well, it all began when I was asked to join a nonprofit governing board at the Voluntary Action Center in Flint, Michigan. I realized that I would be the only minority person or person of color on that board, and probably the only one that never had any board governing experience. So there was no training, there was no orientation, there was no notebook, there was no how to. Clearly, I was given the mission and the vision, and that was it. And upon joining, I was immediately elected vice president of the governing board with zero knowledge. Didn't think I needed any because I relied on all the other board members who were experienced and in business in the community. I relied on them for the decisions and just kind of voted and went along. That was my introduction, and it was a rude and stark awakening, Alex. I got to the board meeting early one evening because it was always after work, and I was the first one. And my executive director walked in. Her name was Sybil, and she had a horrible look on her face and a stack of papers in her hands. And I said, "What's wrong, Sybil? How can I help?" And she said, "We're losing our grant with the suicide hotline with community mental health. It's our partnership. We've expended all of the money and there's no replacement funds. And I don't know what we're going to do because we take a high volume of potential suicide calls each week." And I said, "Well, what can I do? What can I do to help you?" And she said, "Get us a grant." Okay, I only knew about grants for higher education to go to school if you needed support or you had a low income. So with that, I said, well, I don't know anything about grants, but if you can help me, I can figure it out. And she threw the papers down sort of angrily on the conference table and said, if you don't know anything about grants, what are you doing on my board? Why are you taking up a seat? Why are you taking up space? And I said,
Hmm.
well, you asked me to join the board and you didn't ask me if I knew anything about grants or nonprofits or the volunteer center. You just simply said, we want you to be on our board. And the minute I sat down in the first board meeting, I found myself elected as the vice president without even having a chance to observe and learn the ropes at all. And so she said, I'm just disgusted with you. And I think we need to replace you on the board. And I didn't realize then that I should have had orientation, I should have had training, I should have had financial reports, all of that. So the other board members came in, they were older, more experienced, they've sat on multiple other boards in the community. And I asked each one of them as they entered the board meeting room, do you know anything about how to get a grant? Because we're losing our suicide hotline money. No, that's the executive director's job. We don't get involved in that. And it's like, okay, then why would Sybil be so angry at me for not knowing anything about grants? And they said, well, we know the other boards that we sit on, we approve the receipt of grants and we approve the submission of grant requests. But that's it. The staff handles everything else. We don't ask a lot of questions. We don't micromanage. So if you've never been on another board and you've never understood that we have to have a resolution to accept money and to submit, then that's about it. That's all you really have to learn as a board member. I don't understand why she's so angry at you. So I was quiet the rest of the meeting and I was crestfallen at the rest of the meeting. The next morning, as much as I needed my hourly pay on my daytime job and I went to school at night, I called in sick that morning and I was at the public library when they opened up at 9 a.m. And I went to the reference desk and I said, this was in, oh my goodness, this was in the 1970s. Okay. And I went to the reference desk and I said, do you have any books on a grant, how to find grant funding, how to write whatever it is they ask for in a grant and who gives this money? And she said, you're not the first person to ask for a book. We don't have any books on the shelf about grants. I didn't know then, Alex, but it was planting a seed for me to publish 48 books and articles, in addition, plus articles about grant writing and the process and where to go. At the time, I was in no shape to be anything called an author. None of the above. I was taking remedial English at the community college, so not somebody that was going to be writing a book or an article or anything else. So I felt lost. There was nothing to go by. And finally, the librarian said, I have a 3-ring notebook. There are 3 pages in it. They're pretty well worn, but we can copy down for you the information. And I said, well, what's in the notebook? The names of 3 foundations here in the community that you may be able to go and meet with. And I said, oh, wow. Okay. So I copied everything down and I took it home. And one just kept calling out to me, and it was the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation in Flint, Michigan. That is their headquarters, and they're international. And at the time, I found out they were one of the largest foundations in the world. But I couldn't understand why the name Mott kept circulating in my mind. So I asked my grandmother, why do I feel like I know the name Mott? And she laughed and smiled and she said, baby, every Saturday when your grandfather goes to work on those cars or automobiles over at that huge estate by the community college that has all those apple trees. And I said, yes. And she said, and Grandpa tells me you sat on the back steps and the man who owns that estate would always come out and pick an apple for you, and you would sit there and eat an apple with him and chat. And I said, Uncle Charlie? And she said, yeah, Uncle Charlie. And I said, what does Uncle Charlie have to do with the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation? And she said, Uncle Charlie is Charles Stewart Mott. So I made an appointment with his son-in-law, got in right away when I told him whose granddaughter I was. And 6 weeks later, I picked up a check for $300,000 for
Wow.
the organization. It was a dream come true.
Wow. That's a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you. I almost hate to admit how ignorant I was as a governing board member.
Listen, we've all, many of us at least, have been in positions where we are aspirational in where we are. We don't yet have quite the qualifications, but we know we can get there. And it's just a matter of time before we do. And, that's where imposter syndrome also comes from. So
Yes.
I'm also living proof of that, not as beautiful as a story as yours, of course, but, I've been in positions too where not quite in my place, but I found my groove after a certain period of time. You mentioned 48 books plus articles all about grant writing, because you even mentioned grant writing for dummies, which is awesome because it's the For Dummies suite of books, which is very popular. Can you share a bit more about those books?
Yes, I have 8 editions or 7 editions of Grant Writing for Dummies. Sorry. The last one came out in 2022, and I'm guessing they'll be approaching me for a new book early next year. I also have Nonprofit Kit for Dummies, Fundraising for Dummies, and Nonprofit All-in-One for Dummies, which is like a 600-page, all the books that any nonprofit would need to get started and to stay on the right track. And then I've also written for McGraw-Hill, Solution Tree, a few other organizations, Thompson Publishing, but it's been a blessing, and it all started in 2001. Before that, I self-published and sold at manuals, grant writing manuals and grant writing cassette tapes at my workshops on grant writing. So I've always been a trainer, always had something as a product to sell for revenue.
I know in our earlier conversations before this recording, I knew I was going to have difficulties trying to pick a topic with you because there's a lot we could cover because you've seen so much. And I felt that the best way to have this conversation was to talk about the higher level, the lessons learned, the mistakes that nonprofits typically make versus, talking specifically about grant writing or whatnot. So this is where we are today in the sense of trying to figure out how to help, especially early nonprofits, new nonprofits, some of these mistakes, because I know you've seen them time and time again, and it's probably the same messages you have to repeat. So I was wondering if we could start there. If you could say, for example, and you can come up with any number, 1, 2, 3, 5 top mistakes that you find most founders make when starting their nonprofit that you just see over and over and over again.
Number one, they think they own the nonprofit. While we are literally supposed to manage a nonprofit like a business where it actually does have a profit and a reserve to move over from year to year and an endowment, they still think they own it. And then the second one, they write the mission statement, the vision, and the strategic plan before they actually get their first group of board members together to have a meeting and to allow them to participate after they're oriented to the founder's vision, okay, or the organizer's vision. Number 3, they form it specifically for the benefit of drawing a paycheck for themselves versus understanding the importance of fulfilling their mission and making a difference in the communities that they plan or promised to serve. Number 4, they want $1 million grant in 3 months so they can jumpstart their entire business plan, organizational plan, strategic plan, dream for having a full-fledged nonprofit in a brand new building, fully staffed with everybody getting paid top of the line salary, and the founder being able to step back and take long vacations and get a big check still, okay? Number 5, the board is composed of friends and family and the rest of the yes people. There seems to be nobody on the board who can be the person who says, no, this doesn't sound right. Let us see the financials before we jump into a new project or a new program and launching it. So yes, those are the 5 fatal mistakes that result in a nonprofit not being around for more than 3 to 5 years.
All right, so let's go through each one of these things because I know there's a lot more we can cover on each one. The first one, when you say own, that the founder doesn't own the nonprofit, what do you mean by ownership?
The ownership is the public. It's the public, it's the stakeholders, it's the people they're going to serve, it's the people on the board, it's the government, the provincial agency in the United States, it's the IRS. You don't own a nonprofit. It is a charitable organization that is created and approved with that status in order to fulfill its charitable mission. Charity means not helping yourself first. It means helping others first.
And the perception or the mentality or the mindset that they have in terms of ownership, is it like is it what's the right word? Not a conquest, but is it a sense of pride to say, this is mine, I have control over it? Or is it something different? Is it a financial ownership? Like what are what's the harm in saying I own this nonprofit?
Because they take on the persona and the attitude of my way or the highway, mine. Even if you vote no and I can't get a quorum, I'm still going to do it. It's mine. I started it. I founded it. I put the money in it to file for the status and to get us started. So you can never fire me. You can never take away my pay level. It's mine. Okay, that's what I hear people saying. And I even met with a potential client. Potential is the key word here because I didn't take them. And I said, I'd like to see your bylaws. And when I saw the bylaws before our actual conversation, in the bylaws, she had made up a bylaw about being there forever and never being replaced.
Very self-serving.
Oh, yeah, very self-serving.
So as an alternative, then, the best practice would be, like, we want to learn from these mistakes. So that would be to say, I founded this thing, but it's not really mine, it's ours. Like, what would be the better positioning or mindset of that founder?
It was my dream that gave birth to this nonprofit organization or NGO. However, this is for the benefit of the community. And so we don't have ownership, we have responsibility, we have fiduciary oversight, we have a mission to go out and let other organizations and target population members know what we do, what we're trying to do, what kind of help we need, and how we can be partners in the community and form a network of people who are giving and helping those in need.
That's beautiful. Okay, I think that covers point number 1. Let's go jump to number 2 then. Is, you said, to write a business plan, marketing plan, all these different things. This is the mistake they make. Writing all of these things before their first board member. So what's wrong with that? What's so important? Like, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a very clear vision of what you want to achieve before you and before you hire the board members, to even convince them to become board members? It's like, look, I got all these papers. We're established. I'm established. Therefore, you should join the board.
Here's this conversation. Hi, Marcus and Sally and Jane. I brought you together because I want to talk about a dream that I've had for a long time. And it is to have a charitable organization, not a foundation, but a charitable organization that provides gap services in the community, that we're not duplicating what any other type of nonprofit or NGO is doing. It's my dream, and I really have an idea for what I would like the mission, the vision, and the strategic plan to be. But I'd like to invite you to be on the board or to consider board membership and to work with me and help flush this out, because I believe when everybody is providing input and talking from their heart, not from their pocket, that there's a buy-in that will genuinely connect you to what we're trying to do.
Hmm. That is a much, yeah, more we approach for sure. And what I like about that is that you are now get access to the experience, the knowledge, the wisdom, the passions of all these other board members, as opposed to it all stemming from one person. And that one person might have some great ideas, but I think a small group of people dedicated with a dedicated focus will achieve a lot more than just one single person can.
Absolutely.
Okay, the number three would be you wrote is for the benefit of the paycheck. So the mistake is they want the paycheck. They are money focused instead of the mission focused. And I mean, I can't ask the question what's wrong with that because I think that's intuitive. But what do you normally see as symptoms of that, and that you have to start course correcting to say, look, it's great that you want a paycheck. You know, everybody has to live. They have to make a certain income to be able to live. But your focus is wrong, and here's where you should be focusing, and here's why you should be focusing on the mission.
Well, when you go to approach your first grant maker or funder in the community, because your fundraising plan should be community-based, you're new, no one's heard of this organization, you have to get the word out, and it has to be a positive word to build goodwill. So when you first meet with the first funder, are you going to say, I founded this nonprofit organization because I need to draw a paycheck? Or are you going to say, it was my vision and dream to create this nonprofit charitable organization to be able to provide services in the community that are lacking. They are in the gap, and there are so many people falling through the gap. I see this every day, and I just want to do something. And the first step was to get approval for nonprofit status, and then bring on individuals to join my board who share the same concern about those people that their needs are not being met. We are here to provide solutions, but those solutions come with a cost. And as a new nonprofit, we just simply don't have the bandwidth to raise enough funding to start to work on our mission and our vision immediately. So I'm here asking you to become a financial stakeholder in our little dream, in hopes that it would grow into something larger and sustainable.
I love the wording that you're using. It's very, you can tell it's very well thought and experienced because it's very passionate. It's emotional, it's sympathetic. It comes from a good place. So I hope that people pick up on that, the tone of your words.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much to talk more about point number three. That's pretty, it's a shame that so many people are actually fall into that mistake because, I mean, that to me is almost intuitive that you should be focused outward, not inward, which leads to number four then, the idea that magically money will fall from the trees, you know, shake the tree and the money will fall, $1 million in grants, if not more, with the shiny office and the fancy new technology and all the great people and everybody's not laughing all the way to the bank, but at least are comfortable enough that money is no issue. I mean, that I know is a definitely a big issue for people. How do you course correct on that one?
I let them know that in the first 2 to 3 years after they receive nonprofit status, no large funder who could possibly give them more than $50,000 is going to look at them until they have demonstrated sustainability. And I also tell them that you start sustainability first by having your board create a give or get policy. That means that each board member commits to a specific amount of money that they can donate, contribute to the nonprofit annually. And they can do it monthly, they can do it all at once, they can do it quarterly, they can wait until the end of the year. It used to be a whole board would get together and say, okay, everybody needs to be able to commit $5,000 a year. Okay, a few board members would quit after that because they knew they couldn't meet that amount. So it's always better to let everybody choose their own give or get amount within their means, especially if you have low income individuals on the board. They're not going to be able to come up with that money. That's like the end of the rainbow for them. So even if they bring in a jar of quarters in December, that's better than zero. It shows I believe in you as a board member. And if they can't give it, they have to find a way to get it. They can always have a garage sale. We always call that a rummage sale. They can cook a fancy dinner if they've taken some cooking classes and invite people to pay like $25 a ticket to come to their home and sit down for a nice meal, and that money would be donated. They can also talk to their employer. The employer might have a matching gifts program so that if the employee gives $500, the corporation matches that with $500 and it doubles the donation. There's so many ways to get it if you can't give it, but you have to be able to have the freedom to give at your own level. The board also has to be trained in the responsibilities as a governing board member, and one of their jobs is to be the bridge between the new nonprofit organization and contributors in the community, people they work with, people they socialize with, anybody that they know at a foundation, a corporation, a business, small, medium, or large, talking about the mission and the vision, asking them to come to a board meeting if they'd like to learn more, and then getting a check and bringing it back to give it to the treasurer so that it goes in the bank. They have a big job. It's more than just showing up at a meeting online or in person, sitting there for an hour and saying yay or nay, and then logging off and going back to the real world. The average nonprofit board member who's doing their real job as a board member is working 15 to 20 hours a month on behalf of the nonprofit organization.
So this is the first time I've heard how it's okay to ask a board member to give at their own level. I
Absolutely.
typically hear that it's at the very least there should be a minimum level of investment, and if they can't, like you said, give it, they should get it. Would you agree with that? Like, would you say, because I mean, there must be some people out there, for example, let's say their maximum is only $1,000 a year. Others could be, 10, 20, whatever. But do you think it's okay as a nonprofit to accept someone who could only give or get 1,000, or should be a certain level of minimum to say, look, you can give your 10,000, 100,000, whatever makes sense, but there has to be at least a minimum level to be and to stay as a board member?
No, because some nonprofits, in fact, it's advised by the Internal Revenue Service here in the United States that nonprofit board member represent the target population and the constituency to be served. So if you're serving the homeless, but you have no one who has gone through homelessness and is now in transitional or long-term housing on their first minimum wage job, trying to see what it's like to budget money for rent, for food, for bus passes because they can't afford a car, and you tell them that the minimum is $1,000 a year, you're likely going to lose that representation. You're not going to have that person, and they're going to feel embarrassed, humbled, low, not worthy, not adequate. It could lead to depression. And if they're depressed about other board members hearing that they can't give that money, who knows that they won't become suicidal? What have we done here when we've started to reject people because they can't set their own giving level?
The other point you mentioned was sustainability, if I understood correctly. To get your first grant, a lot of grant givers will wait until you're sustainable for 2 or 3 years. Is that what I heard correctly? That you should,
Yes, you
at least that's
did.
a reasonable expectation? Or do you think it's like a more or less a minimum that a grant, at least for a sizable amount of grant, let's say, that they would wait that long? Or is it, that's the average, but there are some times where you can get it sooner? Like what's the expectation in terms of how fast it is reasonably to get your first grant?
Year one, they go for the give or get contributions. They ask for seed money from community funds that award anywhere from $500 to $5,000 for smaller projects or for sponsorships in order to have like a $25 a plate dinner or a 5K run for all the marketing materials, for the medals that are going to be given out, things like that. So they're asking for very small. They could probably even go for $10,000 or $15,000. But my red flag is when they come in and the ink is still wet on their nonprofit status award letter, and they say, we need $500,000 this year, and it's August, and they expect that before December, I just say, okay, if I had a pin, I'd burst the bubble that you're living in, because it's not going to happen unless you know of a donor that has that money. They are already familiar with your dream, your vision, and why you did this. And they're just waiting for you to get your board on board so they can write that big check for you. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Your board needs to plan multiple fundraisers every year in addition to giving, and get out and get checks and bring them back, and speak to associations, to local groups like Kiwanis, Knights of Columbus, all of those, and to talk about it so you can come back with a check for $500 or $1,000. That's a board member's real role. Because you don't have the money to hire a grant writer, and you don't have the money to hire a development officer.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so it's reasonable. You're saying 2 to 3 years, your feet should no longer be wet, or the ink, you said, no, it still is dry now. You've gotten and you've proven you've been able to not only find, but properly allocate the money that you have been granted earlier. And then, more or less, 2, 3 years after all that's been said and done, then it makes sense, or you're more likely to go for the larger numbers. So that's a fair statement?
Yes, but there's a step I left out, Alex. In year one, the board members and the executive director need to alternately take turns going to all local potential funders, corporations and foundations, as well as government agencies that may be awarding grants to nonprofit organizations. They need to introduce themselves, give them a packet or a USB drive with mission, vision, strategic plan, everything on it, and start to build a relationship in years 1 and 2, so that when they're in the middle of year 2, they circle back. Hey, I know we met back when we were first getting started, but we are almost at the end of our second year. We're getting into our third year. When do you feel comfortable with us submitting a request for funding? And do you think there's a chance that we may be able to get an award? But that means they have kept those potential funders on the loop with an e-newsletter, with inviting them to all of the special fundraising events, with inviting them to board meetings, with inviting them to subcommittee meetings, and even asking some of those funders to be on their advisory board, which is a lot different than the governing board.
Yeah, I mean, I know that grant writing and grants in general, we could spend a lot of time on. I'm trying to keep it more summary level as well, too, but that's a great call out. Thank you for sharing that. Let's jump to number 5, which is the board is usually composed of friends and yes people. I've heard this before, too. That's the mistake, as opposed to finding board members who not necessarily say no, but they're not like, where is, I guess, I'll phrase it as a question, where you don't want no people, you don't want yes people, you want someone in between. What are the kind of people you're looking for to be able to make the most out of your board?
You're looking for somebody who is represented through the education sector, the social service sector, healthcare sector, public government sector, as well as other organizations where the executive director or someone near the top has a program and you want to partner with them, or you want to ask them to be a stakeholder and help leverage your grant applications when you're submitting larger applications. Those folks should be on the board. Everybody on the board should have a connection, a gift, or a talent. The treasurer needs to know how to keep books. They need to understand the accounting process and accountability. The vice president needs to be studying everything the president is doing. So when it's their turn and they actually are nominated to move up, they don't have to start all over again with, how do I do this? The president should be the person that takes the lead to make sure every board member is trained and helps them get over the fear of going out in the community and talking about, this is our organization. They should have a script. They should have a chance to rehearse it. They should have a packet full of information. And board members should have business cards, not with their own name and number, because people change, but just with the nonprofit's number, the name, the number, the executive director, because that's who they're going to call, the phone number, the email address. If they have a website, that should be on there, and the mission should be on the back. They can always, in a pen, write their name on there and just say, Alex, comma, board member. So when they are making that contact with the executive director, they can say, hey, I met with Alex, one of your board members. I have a card and I wanted to know more about what you do. We're interested in seeing if we have something in common so that perhaps you could apply for funding. It really works, but it's just such a big deal for people to get out there. So find people who represent every segment of the community. You know, the Annie, I believe it's the, I can't think of the name of the foundation. It might be Annie E. Casey, it may be something else, but there is a board matrix available if you look with your web browser, and it gives you occupations, ages, ethnicities, niche areas that you want people to have when they come to your board, and you can select members and start to check that off. So you have a well-rounded variety of potential board members. Ask strangers, don't be afraid.
And so the representation is important, but you also want people, like you said, even if they are well represented, you don't want them to be yes people as well, specifically to say yes to everything. You want there to be a certain level of challenge or a certain level of friction. Like, what are you looking for in terms of the character balance?
I'm looking for people that can push back when they see red flags coming. For instance, the executive director walks into a meeting and says, we don't have this month's financials. They weren't ready when I was getting ready for the board meeting. So I'll email those to you in a few weeks. You'll get them before the next board meeting. Okay. I'm that board member. Excuse me, but why wouldn't the treasurer and your bookkeeper or accountant or whoever's doing the financials, why wouldn't you be able to give us a statement and show us what's been paid, what's due, and where we are on the balance? You can't even give us the balance. We need to see that balance. Where's the bank statement? Where's the print off from today? I mean, we're here and we're responsible. We can be sued if you make the wrong move. So we need to see financials before this board meeting is over. I need to be that board member, and I need for somebody else who's on every other board to be that board member, to demand accountability and transparency.
Lovely. I'm curious, a lot of these strategies seem to be tried, tested, and true. I mean, I'm happy we're illuminating them, but I was wondering if there's any new cool techniques in the market today when starting a nonprofit, or something that, didn't necessarily exist, let's say 10 years ago, that today has become more interesting. It could be technology-based or process-based or a new way of doing things, but I'm curious if there's anything new in the nonprofit starting process.
Well, it's probably not new in every country, but artificial intelligence can be used to help fine-tune mission statements, vision statements, even to give you ideas about what those are. And I think that people don't use it because they're afraid of it, especially if you're not technology savvy. You don't know which website to go to, who to trust. I found that AI is amazing for even generating ideas. So I actually typed a question into AI. Our foundation is 3 years old. I belong to a bank foundation. The board members aren't readily giving any amount that is substantial, typically $50 to $250 once a year. As the founder, I'm giving the majority of the share and carrying the expenses under my own separate foundation. So what kind of a conversation can I have with my board members to step up, do more, and give? And then I just let ChatGPT 4, actually Pro, give me the ideas how to talk to them rationally and
Mm.
not with emotion, like I'm the biggest donor. What are you guys doing? That's what I really wanted to say. Um, but I had that nice dialogue that was so fancy and articulated and professional and soft and kind and compassionate. So that's what I use. So if you can't come up with an ask for a funder, use artificial intelligence to help you with the ask conversation or the ask letter. If you don't know how to put together an introductory paragraph about your organization, when it was founded, the purpose, use artificial intelligence by feeding in the facts and let it create that fanciful paragraph. I really think that it's very helpful, and you don't have to hire a graphic artist for a logo. Use AI to create it. Set up your own website. You don't need to pay $2,000 out to have that done. Think about practical, affordable, and common sense.
This might be a dangerous question, but what about AI and grant writing?
Absolutely. It is
Really?
ethical as long as it doesn't write the entire grant application. You can write a paragraph and put it in AI and say, please clean this up. This is what we're asking for. This is where the grant applicant is located. These were the directions on what to include in this section of the narrative. What's missing? Fill in the blanks. Give me websites. And then I look at it and put it into my word processing. And I use Grammarly or Grammarly Pro to double check it. And then I read it word for word to see how I can personalize it even more.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I know that was a bit of a controversial question because I know some grant writers are like, no, there's no way we can be replaced by AI or even partially, or maybe it's good for ideas like you mentioned, but it's not something more than that. And
It's
I'm
never
happy
going
to
to
hear that
replace
it's,
this. And when a funder
yeah.
or an employer thinks that we can be replaced by them plotting it into AI, they're going to find that their revenues just bottom out clearly from boring, monotone thesis, term paper type language with no personalization.
What would be the one thing that you wish more nonprofits did? And it could be something aspirational. It could be something that it could be one of the five things that the one out of the five, or something above that, where that if you know that if they just had this one thought or one idea, or I'm not even sure the right word, they would be better overall. Like the one piece of advice, I guess, that you would instill upon a new inspired nonprofit.
I've been given this idea to start a nonprofit. And I have to remember that the idea is a gift. The development of my nonprofit is a gift and a blessing. And I have to treat it that way, or it will not be around for very long. This is not about a money-making endeavor. This is about making a change in community, a societal change, an individual change. And my heart has to be in it. And if I have to keep my day job to get it funded, that's how bad I want to see it done.
That's awesome. Bev, thank you so much. This has been very enlightening. You've shared a lot of great information. I was hoping you could share your information so that people, if they have additional questions, they can get in touch with you.
My website is bevbrowning.com, BEVBROWNING.com. My phone number's there. There's also a contact us form there for them to fill out. All they have to do is Google my name, Dr. Beverly Browning, and they're going to find everything with my contact information. I usually don't give out my phone number because it's available all over the world anyway.
Bev, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. It's been a blessing to be a part of this podcast.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.